Hey everyone, it is Irene, Lyon here, and just wanting to say welcome to all those tuning in here live, but also on the recording, because this will be going out to those who couldn't make it live, and also potentially out on social media, obviously just my face, not the gallery, so that we can let other folk in the world know about what we're going to talk about today, which is the 21-day nervous system tune-up course. Before I get into logistics, I'm just going to see who is here in the chat. And I'll also lay out some ground rules for the Zoom. Hello from the UK. Hello from Germany. Yeah, don't be shy. If you're here, just type into the chat so everybody can see where everyone is from today. Just a few Zoom notes. If your video's on, we can see you. And to keep minors out of the view if they do come into your world, just pop off the video. We will be taking questions in the chat. And Mara, who's here from my team, one of my colleagues and support people, will be answering questions in the chat. But if she sees one that she thinks we should answer for everyone here, we will do that. And Seth will also keep an eye out for those. I've got some that came in via Instagram, got one that came in via email, so we'll have plenty to talk about. And also maybe let me and my team know, are you 100% new to this world of the nervous system, healing trauma? Maybe you've already done some of our resources, maybe some of my drop-in classes. Were you in essentials that just happened, gosh, about 2.5 weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago. So we've got UK, Iceland. Ooh, I really want to go there. California, Canada, another Canadian in Alberta, Hungary. Hello. It looks like you just signed up, which is awesome. Great. Okay. So the reason we're doing this special call is twofold. One, to answer your questions about my self-study starter course, the 21-day nervous system tune-up. It's a mouthful. I will talk about that, why I developed this, what it's for, who it's for, and also today, so this is very timely, it is the 28th of February, it's the last day of Feb, and we're doing a special, we're doing a sale. So just for today, we're giving you $100 off of the full tuition price, which is typically $297 US. So for today, it's $197. There's no payment plan with the discount today. So for today to the end of day Pacific time, the 28th, that special will occur. We don't do these very often. The other time we will typically do a sale is that kind of classic cyber weekend Black Friday sale that happens around the US Thanksgiving, which is end of November. So it's quite a ways away from now. So if you're just kind of on the fence and you know you want to do this work and you're like humming and hawing, now would be the time to take advantage of that. One question that somebody did have, and it's just off the top of my mind right now, is regarding support. So, and I will talk about the course and what is within the course in a moment. In our, I like to call it hallways of our online programs, everything is within a website. So I'll start with that first. If you've never done an online course, this might be new to you, but when you join, when you become a member, you get emails from us and you have to set up your username and password. That gets you in to our site, our 21-day course site, where all of the content, all of the resources, all of the lessons, all of the video trainings, all of the exercises, and where you also ask questions of our team is in that website, on that website, within those hallways, so to speak. And the support is year-round. So it isn't just for 21 days. So the 21-day course, one can join this at any time. It is not open for enrollment just for very specific periods of time, like say Smart Body, Smart Mind is, which is what we just closed registration to. You can join anytime. So because of that, we have support in there weekly. Mara, who's here on the call today, Carrie, another one of our moderators and colleague, and Jen, and you can learn about these people on my bio page, and we could pop that up in the chat even right now, like you can see all of our team members there. They're in that forum, in that course, answering your questions around your experience, your learning, your queries, your confusions when doing the 21 days. And they're great. So this is another big bonus with joining one of my programs, is you're not left alone. You have professionals who are trained in somatic experiencing. Both Mara and Carrie are trained in the Feldenkrais method, and Jen also is trained in somatic experiencing. And also there is a breadth of knowledge around working with early trauma and developmental trauma across all of these three amazing women. So you have support, you're not there alone. So that's the first thing I want to mention. The other thing is you can take your time. So I'm going to say that again, because there's often a worry that you won't finish in 21 days. There's no need to finish the 21-day course in 21 days. In many ways, let's just say it's a 21-day curriculum. And if you take 60 days to do 21 days, that is wonderful. If you take a year, and I'm serious here, to do 21 days, that is wonderful too. And within the program, or within the course, I should say, you are being taught, you're learning why when doing nervous system work, nervous system healing work, you want to take your time, you want to go at your own pace. You really want to follow the lead of your nervous system. And the reason why is, for many of us, and you can pop a note in the chat if this is true for you, when we were in learning environments when we were young, how was that sometimes? Often it was stressful, right? There was a time constraint. You had to get your assignment in at a certain time or you failed. These sorts of things that we learned from general schooling, public schooling, private schooling, university schooling. So it's important when you do join and come in, if you do, to really turn your thinking 180 degrees to see this more like you're learning how to walk again. Yeah. And an infant that's learning how to roll and crawl and crouch and walk, you can't put a time limit on that. For those that have raised little babies, you know that they need to do their thing. They need to feel, they need to sense, they need to trial and error. And that's really what this course is about. The other thing I will mention about the 21 days, and that's how we often abbreviate it, 21 days, is there is a blend of theory and practice. So within the 21 days, there is a biology of stress video training, and all this information is also on the site. That is a 5-part video series that is very, very popular. And I run you through kind of the history of your biology from fight, flight, and freeze, the deep roots of what the vagus nerve is, which is very popular these days, why it's important, but why it's not the only thing. We get into how we are wired when we're young, how things might go a little sideways and how we bring things back. We talk about memory. So how our body stores, essentially, we could call it trauma, stored survival stress in the body, in the nervous system, in the movements, and why it's important to work not just, and this is really important, not just at the brain and not just at the sensation level and not just at the vagus nerve level, but at the movement level. So for those who are really new here and you've just come across me, one of my trainings, one of my professions is something called the Feldenkrais method. And that method was developed by a man named Moshe Feldenkrais. He's long passed, but he was really considered the first person who understood neuroplasticity. And he got it in a very deep way. And he essentially created a method to reteach the body how to move, to reteach the body how to learn. And in essence, when we are healing our nervous system and healing the traumas and healing the chronic conditions and the mental afflictions that come with a nervous system that's dysregulated, we have to use our bodies and reconnect to our body and teach it how to move differently, because we don't want to be living in a state of, I'm going to do a movement now, collapse, which is indicative of freeze, depression, shutdown, low metabolism. And we also don't want to be living in I'm at attention and guard all day long, right? And everything is a threat and I have to protect myself. That also is a lot of energy. That's fight, flight. And so by softening, by coming into the body, along with sensation and understanding fight, flight, we start to shift and we start to reteach the body how to be more regulated. We would call it authentic regulation, authentic sensations that we're noticing, or noticing with more authenticity what's happening inside. So I wanted to mention that because the uniqueness of really the work that I've put out into the world online is this blend of this Feldenkraisian learning along with the work of Peter Levine. So again, he's one of my mentors, worked and assisted at his level, at his teaching level. Somatic experiencing really put on the map this fact that we store trauma, we store survival stress in our system, and then that wreaks havoc on the body. We'll talk about that a bit today, no doubt, and you learn way more in the 21-day course. And then the other element that doesn't get touched into in 21 days, but we prime you, is working with early trauma. Now, we don't work with early trauma specifically in the 21 days, but what we do is we build foundation through the neurosensory exercises that are within the 21 days. So just to kind of review that, there are video trainings, biology of stress video trainings, 5 of them, and then 9 neurosensory exercises that are this blend of Feldenkraisian learning and somatic experiencing, with little hints of foundational building for working with early trauma, learning how to contain, learning how to connect, learning how to orient, very important things. And then the other days, because if you're doing your math, you're like, Irene, 9 plus 5 does not equal 21. It does not. There are days where we have prompts where you have to integrate and bring your learning into your world. And we offer suggestions on how to do that. In addition to all the core content, there are extra resources, additional resources. I believe, Seth, some of your music is in there too, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Seth, as well as being my husband and colleague, he is also a composer, a sound healer. So some of that music is put in there for good measure. And then the final thing I'll say about, we could say, features of the program, of the course, is if you choose to go on with me and do my longer curriculum, which is Smart Body, Smart Mind, that's the one we're in right now live, the cost, the full cost of the 21 days, so $300, $297 is taken off of your Smart Body, Smart Mind tuition. So in many ways, you're pre-investing if you want to continue with us with Smart Body, Smart Mind at a later date. So even if you get our discount today at $197, you still get the $300 off of the SBSM tuition. I hope that makes sense. I am going to let my voice pause and have a drink of water. And Seth, is there a comment or a question that you'd like to tackle? And then I'll get into some of the questions that were submitted via Instagram and email.
Sure thing. Yeah. How's my, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Okay. So yeah, there's a couple here in the chat that I'll address. There's one from Melissa. I'm new. I'd like to know if there's anything specific to keep in mind with this work in regards to autism, like with or heightened sensitivity, heightened amplified awareness. So yes, and autism is something that I think we're learning more and more is this massive spectrum. And it can exist everything from people who just are a bit more sensitive to people who have a really hard time functioning. There's a big variety. In terms of, this work, you have to be stable enough that you can sit and, take in a call like this, or listen to an audio lesson, or watch a video. You have to be, stable enough that you can take in the learning. That being said, as long as that's the case, it's going to depend on your unique system, how you do what's called titration. How do you titrate the learning? So that's a word we use a lot in this work. It comes from chemistry, means adding a drop at a time, just one drop at a time, and then eventually a change occurs. So that's the approach we like to encourage everyone to take with this work, no matter where they are on any sort of spectrum. Titrate your experience in a way that you're getting those drops at the right pace for you. So if you are someone who is on that spectrum or know someone who is, and you're interested in how they might do this work, it's just going to mean more awareness of that, really learning how to learn that's the pace that's right for you. And that can, vary quite a bit depending on your situation. So if someone has a real heightened sensitivity, it may be that they just do, I don't know, 5 minutes of a lesson, and then they stop and they leave it. And then maybe the next day they come back and they do that again, or maybe they do 7 minutes, right? There's all sorts of ways to gradually titrate your experience. So that's what would be really important to do.
Thanks.
And
Thanks, Seth.
there was one other in the chat. Do you want me to get to that now or do that later?
I do. I want to add one piece to that,
Yeah.
because I like my analogies. So
Yeah.
think about, I'm going to start again. In the world of health and healing and even medicine, we have been trained, at least in Western world, to see a problem and then we have to fix it. And we see a problem and we take a medication, we have a surgery, we get a procedure, we go and get an adjustment, whatever that might be. Now there's a time and a place for that stuff. But with this work, because I know there's always this worry, what if I don't have enough time? What if I have resistance, which is a question I got earlier that I want to address. We really need to kind of, again, turn that way of seeing, helping ourselves 180 degrees sort of on its head and be like, if you were teaching a child how to write or read, again, if you were watching an infant learning how to walk, if you were learning a new language, you have to do it consistently in little bits. It's not about just 1 hour in one moment and then you forget about it the rest of the week. So there is this integrative quality that is very hard to convey in words until you're in it. But what happens often is when and there's some of you here who may have found by just watching some of my YouTube videos, you are already seeing and experiencing the world in a different way. Let me know if that's correct for some of you who've been watching some of my videos. It's hard to not see once you learn some of this stuff, because the brain, even with theory and education, it processes and cognitively shifts its view of the world, and then you experience things differently just through that education. So it's very important to, again, see this as not something that has to get done in 21 days or that is over by no means in 21 days. We have people that continue to come back and learn and grow, and I am still learning and growing in this. This is not something that we end, just like you don't stop eating well and exercising when you've had enough, right? You continue to do that into your later years. So this work is less, it's not like taking a course of antibiotics for an infection and then you're done, right? You wouldn't keep doing that until you die. Whereas this, you are continually working with your body and learning and regulating and growing capacity. And by doing that, aging actually becomes a lot easier, believe it or not, and just much easier. So I wanted to just add that bit.
Yeah, and it really is a lifelong path. It's about changing the way you are in relationship to yourself and to your environment. And that's not something that ever stops. It just continually changes and refines. Unless there's some end to learning, but I don't think there is, at least as far as I've found, and some other people have said the same. I think there's a lot to know about ourselves. And I think that's something that we can continually refine. And that's really what this work is about. There was another question from someone who was in the essentials, and they just wanted to know how much of what's in the 21-day tune-up material is new beyond what we taught in the essentials, and pretty much all of it.
Yeah.
In the essentials, we gave you a very brief introduction into orienting, and we talked about following your biological impulses. Those are two things that are in 21 days, but they are covered in much more depth. For example, there's two different orienting lessons. So we touched on elements in the essentials, and we talked about it a bit, but in terms of the depth of it, we just skimmed the surface.
Essentials is, for me, was if someone really didn't have the time to go through my hundreds of YouTube videos in 1 week. The purpose was to give you a crash course in the essentials of the theory of the nervous system. So while we talked about sympathetic and parasympathetic and the stress response and things like that, we didn't get into the depths of animals in the wild, the memories that I mentioned, the wiring of the vagus nerve, the deep branches, the different subsets of the parasympathetic nervous system and those things, and then practice. That's the other thing that is completely different. So great question. I'm just going to get to a question I've got a million things open here. Here we go. I'm going to just finish off the question about support. So someone had asked a question via Insta, how long will support be available? So it's all year round, except for we might take breaks around Christmas time for that kind of typical holiday year, but we're usually not away from support for more than a week, give or take a couple days. And what does it look like? So it's all typing. So it's within a forum where you type in a question, and then our moderators, our professional moderators, answer you back. It then notifies you via email. And then you can go back in, say, yes, that answers my question. Or if you have a follow-up question, you ask again. So there is a very nice sort of even titrated way to get your questions answered. There's also a general questions, sort of like frequently asked questions that are answered within the site. And every single lesson has its own thread. So rather than this one big forum where there's a gazillion questions flying around, each day has a question thread. So you can actually go into those threads and learn by just reading people's questions and reading the answer that the moderator has provided for, years of the time we've been in this course. Another question someone had, can I buy the course now and start later? 100%. There's nothing that's there's no element that's saying you can't, you can start at any time. And I just lost my screen. Am I still here, Seth?
Yeah, I still see you.
Okay. I'm going to find you guys again. I'm just not sure where everything went here. That's funny. There you are. Okay. So yes, no need to start right away. This is a good time to bring in that question about resistance. So let's talk a bit about resistance, because I don't want to say I worry, but someone says, I don't have time now. I'm going to start it next month. If you find your brain saying that, I'm going to say right now, as one of our esteemed colleagues said, Twig, you got to cut that shit out. And I say that with full sincerity and a little humor. And what I mean by that is, what is making it such that you can't do 5 minutes, right? You can't do even just opening up the email and pressing play and having the first lesson in the background while you cut vegetables for your dinner, right? So how can you find ways to start? Now, if you're in an emergency situation with bombs going off around you, then I would say now might not be the time to start. And I say that with full sincerity. If you're living in a war zone, if there's a natural disaster that just took out your village, not the time to do this. You need to be in survival mode. But if you live in a home where you are listening to some music, you might be watching a show each night, you have time. It's just touching into what is it that's stopping you from starting. And someone just the other day had said that they had the 21-day course, and for whatever reason, they couldn't bring themselves to do it, but they could spend hours watching my free YouTube videos. So do you want to address that, Seth? Because it's an interesting psychology thing that I think is really important, because I do not want you to put your hard-earned money or your savings into this and then it to just sit in the ether of the internet and you not do it, right? So resistance comes down to survival stress. It comes down to the shutdown response. And so it's like, well, if I'm in shutdown, how am I going to get through this resistance? And this is where sometimes we have to push and override just a little bit It's like that kid going to kindergarten the first day. Sometimes you need just to push them into the door. And usually at the end of the day, they don't want to go home. That was me when I was 5, by the way. So, Seth, do you have anything to add about resistance or
Well,
resistance in general?
yeah, well, it's interesting, the piece too about, I can watch your YouTube videos all day, but I haven't been able to bring myself to start. It just, we learn. I mean, change happens, like Irene was saying, change does start to happen just from learning. But when we're taking in a YouTube video, it is a passive act, right? It's something that we can just sit there and we just take it in, and that's all good. Like, please do that. But perhaps you're subconsciously sensing that if you start to engage with the material in the 21 days, it's not just passive, it's proactive. You're doing stuff. We're guiding you to go into your system in various ways that are intentional. And that is quite different than just taking in a video. And lots of times we will subconsciously resist the things that our system knows will create a change. It's that little lizard brain in the brainstem that likes to, like, you think of it like a little lizard that likes to stay hidden under a rock, right? And it sort of maybe will poke its head out and then go back again. Like, no, I don't think I want to go out there, because change, right, is if we never do anything, I guess there's safety that, right? If we just stay under the rock, that's a safe place, but it's not, because we'll stagnate. So there's a part of our physiology, that brainstem, that wants to keep us safe at all costs, and it will stop us from doing things that are good for us. Even if we know that they're good for us in our conscious level, there can be and this is what resistance is. It's that brainstem saying, no, stay still, don't go out there into that world. So it makes sense. And it's just, yeah, sometimes, you have to push yourself a little bit. And that can be a tricky edge, because there's all sorts of approaches to healing and therapies that push way too hard and should absolutely be avoided. And at the same time, we need to create change within ourselves by doing the work such that we don't have as much resistance to begin with. But there can be a point at which we have to use a little willpower, sometimes at the beginning, just to get ourselves going. And that's an edge that we learn. Like, okay, how much is the right amount to push so that I do what I'm resisting, but I know I will be good for me? And how much is it, oh, I'm pushing I'm going to do every course, everything every day, and I'm going to get this done in 21 days, no matter what. That's too much, probably, right? So finding that balance between rest, titration, and using a little bit of your willpower if you need to. That's a big part of this dance of healing, I think.
Thanks, Seth. And from past experience talking to students and hearing their stories, the ones who are very honest will say, I tried to push through and through and through and be a good student, and it was just too intense, and my system actually went backwards a little bit. Whereas when I finally really listened to you, Irene, and took your advice, so by the way, I don't say anything by accident, I'm telling the truth, go at your own pace, learn. One of the first lessons you learn is called following your impulse. That will save you if you really listen to it and respect it. And this is where the mind does come in a little bit, because it'll say, oh no, don't you chill out tonight. You've got to do all these things. And we hear this, like I remember hearing this in practice, where someone would be feeling great because they've released a little bit of something in a session. And then they take that opportunity to go to Costco, go grocery shopping, clean the house, and like make chili that for the family. And then they crash the next day because they've felt a little bit of energy, and they're going to take advantage of it because they never have any. And so again, sometimes you might feel the desire to keep moving, but then you have to listen to that biology that's like, not now. And that's where as you get more refined and more connected to your system, these little messages actually pop in a lot. And we've been so trained to not listen to them. Back to like when we were little kids, when we wanted a snack, honestly wanted a snack, and we were told, no, you just had your breakfast. But really, probably the kid, oh, you were hungry, or I have to go to the bathroom. No, you can't go, right? This happens in our school system. So I use these examples because these are actually examples that we don't maybe remember that influence us in adult life. And we're getting back to that base level, autonomic nervous system physiology, hunger, going to the bathroom, fatigue, temperature regulation. I want to just remind everybody about that. This is why this work is more than the vagus nerve. It's more than shaking it out. It's listening to these core autonomic physiological processes in us that for many of us, we've completely bleached them out of our awareness, but they're there. So when we start listening, our system starts talking to us more. And I think that's really cool. I want to just follow up on a question that was in the chat, and it's going to be just a general, but someone asked, can I still do this if I'm working with a therapist, or in this case, a somatic experiencing practitioner? And the answer is 100%, 1000% yes. For those that don't know my history, was in private practice for a very long time, been working with humans one-on-one since 1997, and in this neuroplasticity world since 2005. And one of the reasons I left was because I knew that people needed information and homework and learning that they could do not with me. However, I do know, because I have a lot of colleagues who still are in private practice, Mara and Seth would be two of those, and they will say, hands down, the people that have gone through at least, one of my programs, like the 21 days, when they show up for their private session, they're just that much more able to be there, and they don't need to ask as many questions because you've done that by learning through the course. So there is something magical when you get this knowledge on board, because most therapists, even most SE practitioners, they won't take the hours and hours and hours of time that it would take to teach you about your system, because it's just not cost effective, right? To sit down with someone at $200 or $150 an hour to teach you about the vagus nerve when you can do that somewhere else. So that's the other important thing, is they really do complement well. And they also complement folks who are in practice. So maybe you are someone who works with someone. Maybe you are in the helping, healing. This is wonderful for teachers. Anybody who works with another human being, or maybe you're a nurse or a first responder, this will completely shift not only how you see the people that you're with, but how you take care of yourself when you're with that person. And that's the same for parents. This will completely shift how you parent, how you're with your kiddos or your grandkiddos or your nieces or nephews. You will be like the beacon of regulation for them when you can have this knowledge in your system under your belt. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Seth?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's like when you have the foundational knowledge and practices already online, and then you show up for a session, it's just a whole different thing. I'm happy to work with anybody really who wants to do the work. But I will say that those of my clients who I work with privately who have done one of the online programs first, they just are able to do the work much more effectively in our sessions, because there's just so much more familiarity there, and the baseline knowledge is already in them. So yeah, it is a really, really great complement to private work. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm going to read another question that's in via email. So if anybody has a question, now is your time to put it in the chat, because we won't just sit here and wait for them. So get them in. If you're feeling in your system a little urge to type and a little activation, then get it in the chat so we can answer it. This question came in through Instagram. They asked, is it safe to do the 21 days if I'm pregnant from an emotional standpoint? So yes, and of course you have to monitor yourself, but we have to remember when a woman is pregnant, they are still experiencing the stress of the world, right? They're experiencing their digestion, their immune system, their cardiovascular system, relationship. So what better time really to become more refined in understanding what you're sensing? And one of the key things when we're cooking up a new human is we want to be connected to that viscera, right? We want to be connected to our pelvic floor, our uterine area. We want to listen to the impulse of, I think I better rest today, right? So many kiddos, and this was me, you know, our mothers worked to death and were stressed out and not feeding themselves well and not having that kind of need, those needs met. So from a physical standpoint, it's essential. And the other thing is when we are storing emotion and storing traumas, that impacts our ability when baby comes out to attune to them. So one of the most important things for the future of the human race, in my opinion, is that we create humans that know how to attune to other humans. It's really not that hard because it's built into our DNA. But when mama isn't knowing how to attune to herself, it is very hard for her to attune accurately with little one. It still does happen, right? But how can we make it even better? How can we allow also mama to know it is important to attune? It's important to pick up baby when they cry, right? It's important to not manipulate them into devices that restricts their movement and their ability to explore their limbs and their body and the world around them. So there's so much richness if you can get this before you do fall pregnant. It's such a weird saying, but before you get pregnant, or while, or just after. And then for the parents here who already have babies or have babies that are old, you know, are mature adults, this still will impact how you relate to your adult children. It really is a spectrum of knowledge that I think we all should understand, because we're always in some ways connected to new life and helping new life and all that. Anything else that you'd like to add to that, Seth?
Oh, that's you pretty much covered it there. I mean, being pregnant, giving birth, as someone who was, you know, privileged to assist in my son's birth, and it was just me and mama in Hawaii in a little shack. I can tell you, being connected to your biology is pretty darn important. Being connected to your impulses and following them, listening to them is really important as part of that birth process. So while not everyone is going to do it, you know, in a shack in the jungle, no matter what your situation is, being connected to that basic physiology, those basic impulses, the process of attunement, understanding all of that, super, super important. Yeah. There's one here in the chat we can get to. It says, I've been experiencing CPTSD and derealization, depersonalization for about half a year after a lot of repressed trauma surfaced for me. Been working with interoception and body relaxation and seeing significant symptom reduction. Would you recommend the 21-day tune-up to address these things? So it sounds like you already have some good tools online. So derealization, depersonalization, that is what we would say is a form of dissociation. It's a manifestation of the freeze response. It sounds like a lot of repressed trauma surfaced, and with that came this flood of freeze in your physiology, which is what is fundamentally driving that derealization as you describe it. So yes, working with interoception is super important, and that is something we do in the 21 days in many different ways. Body relaxation can be good. However, there's more to it than that. Underneath that freeze response, which sounds like is predominantly what you're feeling now, there will be a lot of sympathetic energy. And that sympathetic energy doesn't want to relax, actually. It wants to fight or flee. It wants to mobilize. It wants to move. And so one of the things that you would learn about in the course is, one, why that is, the importance of that, and start to get some supportive tools perhaps for beginning to work with that energy, as well as the good work that you're already doing. So I think it could be helpful. Again, you would want to find your own pace with the work, but it sounds like there's some deeper knowledge and practices in there that could add to what you're already doing.
Great. Thanks, Seth.
Yeah.
There's two questions in the chat that I want to address. Oops, where did that go? I'm going to go up. Okay, I'm going to go up. So this is from Anne, and then I'll get to the, there's a question about long haul COVID and chronic fatigue that I do want to address. So Anne's question is, not sure if this question is appropriate. Yes, it is. Can being born 5 weeks early create nervous system I'm going to start that again. Can being born 5 weeks early create nervous system dysregulation as an adult in and of itself, even if there was no isolation in hospital or an incubator? Yes. And the reason why is that means that we came out too soon, and that's a stress in itself. So the fact that there wasn't isolation in an incubator is a big plus, right? That's really interesting. True story, my grandmother on my dad's side was born abnormally prematurely in a shack in the woods in Saskatchewan. And on that day that she was born, there was a big accident where her father was killed. Very strange story. But my grandmother was put literally in a shoebox on the fire and was rubbed with forget what kind of oil. I think it was lard every single day, and they just kept her warm and they kept her comfortable and fed her obviously what they could, and she lived to be like 87, right? So, and she was a hardy lady because she survived that intense, early birth. So yes, it definitely can be a trauma, but it also can give you a massive, robust resilience. Seth speculates that that's why my dad is so strong and robust, as his mother was, she defied serious odds. So you say then, Anne, I read that there's a connection between early birth and insulin resistance, for example, and I'm wondering if the 21 day can help with this. So I can't make any medical claims, but what I will say is that makes sense to me, because insulin resistance, if we just track this back simply, is the endocrine system just being a little off, right? There's something going on where the hormonal structure in relationship to foodstuffs, i.e., glucose in our food, is a little off. And what I've seen with some of our clients, and one in particular, you might really enjoy the story of Sandra. And she is a 21 or a Smart Body, Smart Mind member, but I believe she started with the 21 days. She is a type 1 diabetic. And she has found that by doing this work and learning how to connect to self and the environment specifically, she can regulate her glucose levels really beautifully and is in need of less insulin than she was before she had this work on board. So I personally believe that a lot of the, and I don't love the word, but diseases and troubles like something like diabetes, for example, like full-blown diabetes, there was something that occurred in the system that insulted the system, whether it's a toxin, a stress, a trauma. And I do believe that we can shift a lot of these things when we get deep into the cellular structures of the system and restore safety and regulation back to it. So great question there. Do you want to add anything, Seth? Because you were a preemie and lived to tell the tale.
Yeah. Well, I had a different situation because I was in an incubator and had that rupture. So I was 6 weeks preemie and then had all that on top of it. So, I mean, I certainly experienced some traumatic imprints from all of that. I mean, it probably started with being born early in the first place because my mom was so just go, stressed herself. I mean, her water broke in the middle of a city council meeting. She was a city councilwoman and she like finished the meeting instead of, just going right away. So, that was the indicative of my environment while I was in there. And that can often be, I think, a part of being born premature is it's just, you're kind of like, you get me the hell out of here. This is a stressful environment. That itself is something that can leave a mark on the nervous system and be worked with. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no matter what your early experiences were like, if it was challenging, that's gonna have some kind of traumatic imprint most likely. And yeah, that can be worked with. And it's important to understand also when you're talking about these early wounds, early developmental trauma, like Irene was saying, There's more of that in the SBSM course, because we can't, do everything in 21 days. It's really about just giving you the foundational tools. That being said, the process of attunement, of learning to listen to yourself, of following your own pace, learning how much is enough for you, that process itself, which is part and parcel of the program, or it should be, as we will say over and over again, you got to find your own pace. One of the big reasons for that is because that process of attunement itself is healing. Figuring out how to listen to your own system such that you are giving yourself what you need at the pace that's right for you, oftentimes is a form of repair for those foundational early developmental wounds, because a lot of time that's what didn't happen. So even though we don't address early trauma specifically too much in the 21 days, there are approaches within it that support that healing. So,
yep. Thanks, Seth. I want to address the question someone asked about chronic fatigue syndrome, and I might just name a few other things that often connect with that: fibromyalgia, chronic pain, autoimmune. And then they also asked about long haul COVID. Now, there's a bit of a distinction, but I'll speak first to chronic fatigue and chronic pain and fibro. Those in our world of somatic experiencing are clustered into what we call syndromes. It's a fancy word for the system has more than one thing that is gone off. Usually when someone has fibro, chronic fatigue, autoimmune, chronic pain, there is also disturbance in the gut, right? The digestion. There's disturbance, obviously, in the immune system. There's disturbance in the cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory capacity. It's very hard to say to someone who has chronic fatigue, go for a run. That's ridiculous. But we would say, can you move a little bit, right? Can you even just move your arms? Can you move your legs in bed? There are some people who come into our work and they're bedridden because they're so unwell. And it's all about, again, starting with what you can do and not overdoing it, but stimulating the body enough to let it know that there's some flow capacity. So these cluster of syndromes are occurring because the fight, the flight, and the freeze have been ramped up and on for a very long time. And what occurs is that if the system is so darn worried about survival because of held traumas, held emotions, whatever it might be internally, the system co-ops all the resources to stay in protection mode. This is very important. Protection mode, but then it leaves behind digestive upkeep, cellular repair, immune enhancing capacities, flow, blood flow, all these things. So over time, we usually don't see chronic fatigue syndrome at age 5 or 10. Sadly, we're starting to see these things crop up a lot younger. And I think that's just because there's so much stress in the world and there's a lack of natural connection to the world that I grew up with, which was just there, right? Being outside, playing, not being connected to our parents all the time. Like there was a freedom when I was growing up that a lot of kids just don't have anymore. And so we're seeing a lot of these chronic symptoms and syndromes come into the 20s and 30s, when it used to be something you would just see in someone in their 50s and 60s. So part of healing, and yes, people heal these intense conditions in our work, is not only understanding why this is happening, but lessening the stress responses that are staying stuck and really allowing the body to restore regulation through what we would call capacity building, and understanding, that little fight flight energy should be listened to. It should be felt. There's a strong connection between these syndromes and held in anger, held in aggression, held in tears, people pleasing, right? ALS, which is a neurodegenerative condition, some might know it as Lou Gehrig's, it's a very strange thing, but they've even done a research paper. It's called the happy person's syndrome. Like people who end up in these severe conditions are always happy. I'm so happy, but really underneath, they're furious and pissed off that they were, abused, all these things. And so it's being stored inside, and then that's where the system kind of eats away at itself. But you have to remember, the system doesn't want to be unwell. It wants to be regulated, but this higher brain of ours, which we still don't really know where it came from, right? It will stop us from doing what our body needs. The conditioning that we've been brought into has stopped us from expressing our animal selves, right? So humans are really interesting. We have this mammalian physiology, but then this higher consciousness, super consciousness, that can actually trump healing. But here's the thing, we can also make it go the other way. We can take our brain, not take your brain out of it, but let the mind be less fervorous, like don't keep me from going to the bathroom. Why am I doing this? Go to the bathroom. Don't hold back that. Why am I holding back those tears? Oh my God. I'm following the tension of holding back these tears. So I get really excited when someone asks about those questions, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, because there is a way to shift those things. It's possible. If you haven't watched my latest video around why I believe there's no such thing as little t, little trauma, that's a must watch, because it talks about fibromyalgia as a case study. So be sure to watch that. For the long haul COVID question, everything applies. And then the one thing I'll add is, and again, this is just for me doing my own research and talking to people who have moved through this, you want to look at mitochondrial health. And what we're seeing is that for whatever's going on with it, there is a dysfunction at the mitochondrial level. It's impacting that cellular mechanism to make energy. Right? Our mitochondria create energy. They also do a lot more, as we're learning. So we want to do the things that will improve that. And I won't go into all of them other than to say, this is where being in nature is important. Getting out into sunlight is important, even when it's a cloudy day. Getting your feet on the earth, touching trees, doing things that really restore the mitochondria. And there's 2 interviews I've done. One is actually, the 2 interviews I recommend are with Carrie Bennett, all on my YouTube channel, all on my blog. She is a quantum clinician, and we talk about the importance of light, the importance of stimulating the body with heat, sometimes with cold. That can also improve mitochondrial health, but I don't recommend that if you are chronically sick. That's where a cool shower can be helpful, not a cold plunge. I did see there was a question about that somewhere in the chat. But mitochondrial health is super important. And then supplements and those things, that is not my expertise. Someone did ask. I do not make recommendations for supplements, but in my older years, I've seen that supplements can be very useful, and that's where you want to consult with a naturopathic doctor, a functional medicine specialist, or someone who specializes in supplements for boosting up mitochondrial health. Things like coenzyme Q10 and quercetin and these sort of nutraceuticals that are becoming more popular. So just look at mitochondrial health and also my interviews with Carrie Bennett, and that will get you on your way. Cannot recommend that enough. Anything else that you've seen pop into the chat, Seth, that you'd like to address before
there's two I want to get to before we end.
Okay.
Just a real quick follow-up on the cold plunge one. Yes, cold plunges can be super good for your health, for your circulation. Granted, you have the genuine capacity to handle that experience. For some people, getting into the cold plunge is going to be way, way overstimulating and will actually send them into shutdown. Also, staying in a cold plunge too long. Right now, unfortunately, there is a lot of this being promoted. Stay in that ice bath for 10 minutes, 30 minutes. That is going to send your system into shutdown. And if you are in doing that and enjoying that, it just most likely means that you already have been living in what's called functional freeze. Your system is entrained to be in that state. And so for you, it probably feels very zen-like and relaxing to be in that ice bath for 30 minutes. However, what's happening is you're just going into freeze and reinforcing that response. So cold plunges are good quick dip, flush, especially if you're coming from hot, cold, really great. But again, only that if you genuinely have the capacity to do it without getting overwhelmed. And now in a similar thread, talking about overwhelm, there's a question here from someone who's in the 21 days and says that just trying to orient, suggestions like feel your butt in the chair, etc., triggers my nervous system to go haywire. I get tears and panic, etc. What can I do? I don't know how I can start the 21-day program with this issue. So this sort of ties into what we were saying about hypersensitivity earlier. So can you orient for 10 seconds? And it may involve that you stage it, like you said, you know what your resources are, maybe that, okay, what do I do when I get panicky? Well, I like, a cup of this kind of tea, or I like to stick my feet in warm water, or whatever it is. I don't know, whatever you use to soothe yourself, you have that on standby, like it's right there, and you know that it's there for you. And then you maybe start by, you don't orient inside. You only look out. You don't care about what's happening in your body. You don't pay attention to your butt on the chair. You just find something nice to look at. That's all. How long can you hang out and just take in something nice to look at? Okay, if you can do that, maybe while you're looking at something that's really nice to look at, you can hear the sounds around you. Can you bring in another sense? Maybe you can feel your butt in the chair for a few seconds, but then you leave it. And like, it may be that you do a 30-second practice and then you go to your resource and you're soothing, right? So when the system is so hypersensitive, like you describe, you just have to find ways to be creative like this, where you can dip into a practice, know that you can leave it, and have something there standing by with which to calm yourself, soothe yourself. I hope that makes sense. It is possible to build the capacity, but that's the only way to do it, at least that I know of, is by doing it and finding about how small of a touch into the system can you handle. And then you just increase from there. Even if it's just a few seconds, it's like, okay, for 5 seconds, I can sit and I can take in this thing and I'm breathing, and that's enough. And then you don't do anything until the next day. It can be that small. So.
Yeah, and then another trick, if this comes down to resourcing, as Seth's been talking about, something that you enjoy or helps soothe you, and someone has a question about soothing and shutdown, so we'll get to that. But, if you're someone that, say, you like to watch some shows on Netflix or TV or whatever, do that. And every now and again, can you pause it and feel your body? Because you're probably in a bit more of an open state when you're watching that funny show or whatever it might be. And, use that as an opportunity to not just zone out, but to zone in, like what's happening in my body while I'm watching this comedy, or what's happening while I'm watching this action film. I'm feeling, a bit of adrenaline, that kind of thing. Or, is it making me a little sad? Can I feel that? So there's ways that you can use your current day things to tune into what's happening. Someone asks, how is soothing not shut down? So this comes with trial and error. Usually we know we're going into better, I'm going to say, self-regulation, and we're soothing. We're not in hypervigilance or in shutdown, because we're just a bit more alert to the world around us in a way that feels calmer. So we're also maybe not feeling drowsy, like we're a bit drugged. So soothing is being a bit more self-regulated, and soothed is in our nervous system, where our system isn't heightened with survival, and we're able to engage and listen, take in, be interested, be curious, we could say. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, it could be music. It could be
Yeah.
a blanket that you're around. Doesn't mean you're going to shut down. It's just, this is comfortable. This is soothing for me.
I'm just reading here. Okay. I'm just going to read this out and then we'll maybe wrap up, Seth. So
Sure.
I watched, so this is actually someone who watched our video where we talked about money, Seth, and society and healing resistance. And the person asks, Oh, am I reading the wrong one? Where did it go?
You mean the one about
Oh, no, sorry. It went away. There was one about driving.
yeah.
There it is. So can this program help someone with driving anxiety? So the general answer to that is yes. And anxiety is like a term that we throw out, but what's happening with anxiety, that's survival stress, that's fight, flight. And what you say here, so social anxiety, phobias, panic attacks that are a bit more intense in anxiety, all of that stuff we would say, yes, can be helped when we become more not only aware, but we know how to move those energies out in a safe and contained way, or contain them so they shift into maybe emotion or sensation or a movement, some kind of, maybe that is where a shaking response comes out. But this person says, I feel unsafe on busy roads, especially when far from home. So you say you've got sensitivity and complex PTSD, and I drive, but since COVID, it's been overwhelming to not go too far, and being out of my comfort zone results in panic and feeling out of my window of tolerance. Can this program help build capacity for this type of stimulation for a highly sensitive person? Absolutely. And I think what has occurred for many of us, and even I'm feeling this a little bit, I used to travel so much. People that know me know this. And because I haven't, just due to circumstance, there's a little bit of am I going to know how to navigate an airport? Am I going to want to be on a plane enclosed for 10 hours? I'm not so sure, right? And so it's where, because of the last 3 years being so different for everyone, how can we re-engage with the world and ourselves again back in that titrated way? And for many, and I'm speculating here, but I think Seth would agree with me here, the last 3 years could have really sparked up a lot of old traumas around isolation, around being contained and not able to break free and move and go where we want to do and do what we want to do. And that's, okay, and that we can work with that, we can heal that, but we don't want to stay isolated. We don't want to stay not going out and doing things. And this program can help build that resiliency again. And many people will say, oh my God, I did fly again. I did get on a road trip again. I went and visited friends again. Anything to add to that, Seth?
Well, it's important to remember that anxiety, again, yeah, we've gotten so that we've thrown it onto all these different situations, but it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. Social anxiety, driving anxiety around medical issues, whatever, anxiety about heights. It's all the same thing. It's a stored fight flight response, and it's expressing in particular associations with certain things. So when you learn to work with that fight flight energy in general, then it's really doesn't really matter which label it's been existing as. You learn to work with it on its own, and it doesn't matter if you're driving or in crowds or what the situation is. It's about learning first to understand, oh, this is a fight flight response and these are the sensations, and I start to recognize that sooner and sooner and sooner, and I start to learn ways to work with that activation, to allow space for it to move through, or to do something that brings on the parasympathetic system. So maybe I just let my system come down. There's all sorts of ways that you learn how to do that, and it can apply to any situation. So it's not necessarily about driving or whatever it is. It's about working with that fundamental charge. That being said, there are ways you can apply this work into specific situations. And again, it involves titration. So it may mean you just sit in your living room and you imagine driving and you notice, does that bring anything up? Okay, maybe I go sit in my car and I put my hands on the wheel, but I don't go anywhere. Does that bring anything up for me to work with? So this principle of using titration can apply in many different ways. And that's one of them.
Great. I think we've covered everything. Lots of great questions. What I will say is, at the core of this sort of work, this curriculum, there's so much that we don't realize we don't know until we start to get into it, if that makes sense. A lot of people will say, wow, I had no idea how much I resisted my need for hunger or to take care of myself. This element of how we take care of ourselves has been so skewed for many of us. Again, the generations of kids that were, unless you've got a broken limb that's visible, I'm not going to take you anywhere to get that looked at. I don't feel well, that world of, well, no, you don't, you're fine, or if you cry, I'll give you a reason to cry, and all these strange things that have become so socially acceptable. Spanking, oh, spanking's okay, but no, I don't hit my kid. It's like, no, spanking is hitting your kid. And just the way that I think up until now, and it's getting better, I will say, we just haven't honored the human system. The way that we used to bring kids to hospitals and just leave them there for procedures. That's terrifying for a little person who doesn't understand anything. So often some people will say, well, I didn't have any big traumas. I wasn't hit, I wasn't abused, I wasn't raped, I wasn't in a war. Yes. And look at society. So many of us are living in what's called functional freeze, which is where we're functioning really well. This was me, but we're completely cut off from our natural instincts, our real survival instincts, which we need. We need to have our survival mechanisms to keep us safe, and know what is safe, what is not safe. But it's, again, hard to kind of convey until you dive in the subtlety that this work can offer. And when we start to connect with that natural intelligence in our biology, in our nervous system, these systems that connect and orchestrate with our autonomic nervous system, again, digestion, immune, cardiovascular, lymph, all the systems, they start to improve slowly over time. And that's, I think, sometimes the hardest thing to understand, is that this really does impact all the systems in the body, as well as how we connect with others and how we connect with the world around us. So it's kind of this comprehensive human learning course that you will have forever. So if there again is an impulse and an interest to dive in and to learn, now is the day to get in there, because of the little sale that we've got going on for the day. So just again, a reminder, normally the course, the 21 days, is $297. Today on the 28th, it is $100 off, so $197. There's no payment plan on that. And when you are a member, you've got the course for life. You're not going to get kicked out of there. You're going to have access to our moderators, to the lessons. And then, of course, if you want to go on to do Smart Body, Smart Mind at a later date when we run again, that full cost of the course is taken off of the SBSM tuition. That's everything. Any final things that you would like to add, Seth, before we wrap?
Well, just encourage anyone who's been intrigued by this talk, and maybe you've been thinking about it for a while. Just, go for it. Now is a good time. And it's any time is a good time, but it's more affordable now. And just get started. There's really no substitute for just doing the work. And learning is important too. And maybe you want to just hang out and you just want to watch the YouTube videos, and that's fine too. But there really is no substitute for actually starting to do the practical elements of the work to get it under your belt. And again, this isn't like, it's not a pill you take, right? It's you're learning a whole new way of being. And so it makes sense if you have resistance. Subconsciously, you will know, wow, if I start this work, I might not recognize myself in a year. And that does happen. Like, a lot of the ways that we were raised, the ways that our personality was formed, was in reaction to trauma. So for so many of us, ways that we just think that we are, this is just how I am, this is my personality, it's actually not. It's an adaptation that you made in reaction to survival stress. And as we do this work and these survival stresses get peeled away and emptied out of the system, and we get more regulation, it can be kind of weird. We can start to realize, like, I don't feel like myself. I don't feel bad, but this is unfamiliar. I'm not sure who I am anymore. That's almost universal in this process. So all of those elements, your system may be sensing subconsciously, and it can really inform. It can this resistance that we've been talking about, where it's like, oh, I don't know, or you buy it, but I just don't get started, right? So it's normal, and just encourage you to dip your toe in anyways, and then dip your other toe in, and then maybe stick your whole feet in. And take it slow, but just start if you can. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mara, for being in the chat, and Bonnie for being here, helping with things on the back end. Thank you, everyone. May the force be with you, and maybe we'll see you in the hallways of 21 days. And if not, hopefully we'll still see you somewhere online. Take good care, everyone. Bye for now.